Hello, my name is Alexis Yu. I'm a PhD student at Stanford University, and today I'll be presenting our work on virtual reality without vision, a haptic and auditory white cane to navigate complex virtual worlds. This work was done in collaboration with Mike Sinclair, Rob Kovacs, Eyal, Ofek, Christian Holz, and Ed Cutrell. From travel to social experiences to retail and education, the breadth of applications for virtual reality or VR has seen an increasing growth and interest for both industry and consumer applications. In this space of opportunity, accessibility has thus far not been a consideration in the development of mainstream VR systems. By considering VR and accessibility, we have the potential to open doors to new applications. In this work, we look specifically at VR and accessibility for people who are blind or have low vision. Beyond entertainment, VR could offer a compelling use for orientation and mobility training for students who are blind. For example, it could allow a user to preview new spaces they've never visited before or practice navigation and wayfinding in a diversity of environments. To navigate during day-to-day activities in the real world, people who are blind typically use mobility aids such as a long cane, also called a white cane. The cane conveys information about the environment in the direct path of travel by providing various sources of information. As a user walks through the environment, they receive kinesthetic feedback from collisions with the cane, tactile feedback from sweeping the cane on different textures, and equally important to the haptics for localization are the sounds. The direct sounds and ambient noise, the echoes and reverb, all of which together provide a sense of the spatial location of sound sources. In this work, we create a white cane controller and examine the ability of people who are blind to independently navigate and explore large virtual environments with the use of a virtual cane. In this video, a user is exploring a virtual space with a controller we designed. As the user taps and sweeps the cane, they get haptic and audio feedback from the collisions and textures that help in providing an understanding of the space. Several prior work has explored the use of games in VR systems to enable blind users to interact with virtual content. For example, results from desktop games have shown that exploration in virtual worlds can lead to attaining a survey knowledge of a real space. Other work has explored the use of a virtual white cane for enabling blind users to interact in VR in a similar way as blind users do so in the real world. CaneTroller in particular showed the feasibility of VR interaction for blind users in detecting objects in a virtual environment. This prototype had limitations in the feedback it provided. Its main feedback was for sweeping the cane laterally, which prevented use of many cane techniques necessary to successfully navigate a more complex space. And similarly, the audio was missing important cues that allowed the user to spatially locate the sources of the audio. A cane may seem like a very simple aid, but several aspects affect the user's perception of the haptics and sound. In designing such system, there are several considerations to account for, and I'll discuss a few points in our design rationale. First, different cane techniques are used to interrogate the environment depending on the situation. In constant contact, the user sweeps the cane at an arc at constant contact with the floor. In two-point touch, the user taps the cane at an arc within shoulder width. This range of motion can be spanned by three orthogonal axes: motion horizontally, vertically, and radially. The cane collisions are contact constraints, which occur as large instantaneous forces opposing the motion, and point to the advantages of using a brake-type mechanism. Canes also come in different styles, with variations in the material of both their shaft and tip. These properties affect how the sounds and haptics are transmitted. For example, a plastic roller tip can be easier to slide across rough materials, while a metal tip may amplify both the auditory and tactile high-frequency vibrations felt by the user. These properties are important to consider in rendering high-fidelity tactile feedback in audio. Last, depending on the navigation task, users will transition between specific cane positions, and grip styles. This indicates the need for versatility in the controller's degrees of freedom, such that the various position and grip styles are allowed. With these aspects in mind, we develop a prototype for a virtual haptic cane. This is a belt-mounted prototype. The user holds the controller grip like they would a typical cane. One of the main components for providing force feedback is a haptic brake mechanism. We designed this 3-axis brake based on the required range of motion. Each individual brake restricts motion in one direction: horizontal, vertical, and radial. Each axis employs a different brake. For example, for the horizontal motion, we use a capstan brake mechanism. I won't discuss all the reasons for the differences, but some key aspects for the horizontal motion are that 1, it's bidirectional, meaning that motion can be restricted in either direction, left or right. 2, it's asymmetric, meaning that restricting motion in one direction won't prevent movement in the opposite direction. So users won't feel the stickiness of engaging and disengaging a brake. And last, it has a fast actuation speed. For the radial axis, we use a friction-based brake. The key aspect here is that a unidirectional brake is sufficient since motion of the cane is always away from the body. For the vertical axis, we use a ratchet mechanism. The key aspect here is that this direction of motion is typically in line with the direction of gravity, which increases the torque requirement. For rendering textures, we use a voice coil actuator. We recorded data from real-world materials to create a library of textures using an accelerometer, and then we modulate the signal based on the speed of interaction. The user also wears stereo headphones, and we use a physics-based simulation of wave effects to render spatial audio. This simulation is pre-computed and allows us to account for the way that sound bends around objects, which is really important to spatially locate the audio sources. With these components in place, we conducted a user study to evaluate the system. We looked to assess how the prototype enabled independent navigation, where participants used their sense of touch and hearing and applied their known orientation and mobility skills. I'll discuss 2 of our goals in the evaluation. The first, related to VR and realism, we wanted to see if users were able to apply the same knowledge and skills in using their physical cane to navigate the virtual environment using our prototype. We wanted to understand what strategies were feasible and what information was missing. Second, related to wayfinding, we wanted to see whether the feedback allowed participants to familiarize and understand the space by starting to form a mental map of the space. We decided to conduct our evaluation as a game as it left participants' exploration strategies mostly unconstrained, and by adding game elements, we provided some degree of structure. The game we chose was a scavenger hunt where participants had 2 primary goals: 1, finding targets, and 2, avoiding hazards and room geometry. Here is a screen capture top view and a first-person view of a user navigating the virtual environment. The user is moving towards a target, sweeping the cane to locate it. The user then walks over it to collect it. The user then sweeps across a concrete walkway and walks through a doorway into a smaller room to collect a second target. We designed the game to include scenarios relevant to the 4 categories of function for cane techniques. First, detection, which in the game translated to locating targets. 2, negotiating obstacles in the travel path, which in the game translated to avoiding collisions with hazards. 3, negotiating doors, which translated to navigating between rooms in the game. And 4, following a shoreline, which translated to avoiding walls and following the concrete walkway. Here is the first person and top view of the map users navigated. The environment had an area of 6 by 6 meters. There were 2 rooms with an open doorway in between, 5 targets that appear sequentially, 5 hazards, 1 radio source playing a podcast for ambient noise, and a concrete walkway. We recruited 8 blind users, all of which used a wide cane as their preferred navigation aid. 4 used a cane with a metal tip, and 4 used a cane with a nylon pencil tip. Overall, participants were able to successfully find the targets to complete the game. Looking at some of the game statistics, participants became more familiar with the environment over time. The first time participants played the game, they took on average 9.5 minutes compared to about 4 minutes for the second time. Similarly, participants collided with less hazards, on average 3.5 versus 1. Similar to navigating in the real world, we found that participants had more difficulty navigating certain scenarios. This figure shows a 2D histogram with darker regions indicating the locations where participants spent longer time. These were near narrow spaces such as the corners and doorway. These two other figures overlay participants' trajectory over the game map for Trial 1 and Trial 2 and show how users' trajectories converge to a more distinct and collective path with less collisions for the second trial. In navigating the space, participants relied on their typical cane strategies, with the most common being constant touch and two-point contact. In terms of the feedback participants used, we found participants relied on the kinesthetic feedback mostly to understand the geometry and find open spaces to walk in. P5 and P1 said, I felt the clear entries where I didn't encounter walls, and it helped me detect where barriers were. In complement to the haptics, the audio provided spatial information and increased realism. P8 and P5 said, from the target audio cue, I could know which direction to go and approximately how far. The volume, depending on where you were, helped a lot, because that's what I usually use in the real world. An unanticipated result were the differences in performance between users of metal and plastic tips. Plastic tip users had more trouble understanding the meaning of the tactile feedback. They took longer to find all the targets and collided with more hazards. This was notable not only from the quantitative metrics, but also qualitative comments. One plastic tip user said, the cane was vibrating a lot for a lot of reasons I don't know. The sensations are a little different to me. It almost felt like I had one of those, I don't know if you've seen, the NFB canes that are really flexible, which indeed was a type of cane and tip material we used to create the library of textures and sounds. All metal tip users, on the other hand, noted similarities of the tactile feedback in audio to sensations they were familiar with in the real world. P2 said, what really set out was the tactile, especially outdoors. And P6 said, the sweeping was very real, audio was very real, it helped me locate where things might be. Which brings me to some of the limitations in our system and potential areas for future work. First, our prototype models one particular type of cane as we recorded audio and textures from real-world materials. Some of the insights we gained from the study highlight the importance of user preferences and how they impact perception of the environment. And while we model one type of cane, creating a library of different cane styles and material properties is certainly feasible and very important to consider. Two, in addition, our prototype cannot currently adjust the texture and impact depending on where along the cane shaft a collision has occurred. A collision at the tip generates a very different vibration profile compared to impact higher up the cane. And this can be really important for estimating distances, which may be related to some of the navigation difficulties we observe, particularly in tighter spaces. One solution towards this could be the use of multiple synchronized voice coil actuators. Third, users physically walk with a one-to-one mapping between virtual and real, and it would be interesting thinking how we might enable even larger scale navigation, using similar established techniques from visual applications such as teleportation or walking speed gains. And last, given that users are navigating in VR, interesting augmentations could be explored to enhance not just realism, but user presence. For example, additional navigation cues, such as text or spatial audio beacons, could help provide users a better understanding of the space. In conclusion, we described a prototype experience for enabling non-visual exploration of large virtual environments by using a controller that mimics the experience of using a white cane in the real world. We evaluated this prototype in a virtual environment where blind users relied on their senses of hearing, touch, and orientation and mobility skills to navigate. I hope this shows you a lot of the promising opportunities that exist for furthering research on the accessibility of VR for people who are blind or have low vision. Thank you.